Hi everybody, welcome to Weekend Wrap. I'm Dan Illman, taking a look at last Sunday's Futurity Stakes, part of the Breeders' Cup Challenge Series. This a win and you're in for the newly created Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. We break from the gate. We're going to see that the European entrant, the number one, Neverland Rock, like many European entrants, doesn't break very well at all. But this pace was pretty fast, and I don't think it hurt him that much. Just consider that the horse that's currently in last place is the horse that's going to win this race, and that's the number 11, Uncle Benny, who showed speed in his career debut on dirt for Jason Service at Monmouth and falls far behind in the early portion of this race on good turf. Joyful Heart, cutting back in distance, is cutting out the fractions. The Maiden Real Money is pressing in second. You see Fayette Warrior in third. He's actually going to come under a drive right now. The whip is going to come out very early on Fayette Warrior as he is struggling to keep up. Dragic in the yellow silks is a filly taking on the boys, and she's going to grind up right now as we see Uncle Benny begin to kick from the back of the pack and get to the outside. Dragic is still grinding, and eventually Dragic is going to overwhelm these pace setters, and it looks like that the Wesley Ward trainee is on her way to the win. But you're going to see that very late in the game she is going to change back to her left lead, and the minute she does so, it seems like she loses all of her momentum right there. And here come the closers. Here comes Uncle Benny. Here comes 56-1 shot back to his roots, and they're going to run by Dragic in the last 150 yards of this race. A very nice performance for Uncle Benny, coming from last after being a gate-to-wire winner on dirt in his first career start. He pays 5-1, 12.60. Back to his roots, who is 56-1, making his turf debut for trainer John Terranova, ran second. Dragic faltered to finish third. Big prices in your exacta, trifecta, and superfecta. Uncle Benny by the turf-loving Declaration of War, who also has a 2-year-old stakes winner on turf in Todd Pletcher's Opry. Jason Service does excellent in turf sprints. Arad Ortiz rode this horse beautifully. Didn't panic when Uncle Benny was last early, realized there was a good pace up front, angled widest to stay away from traffic, and kicked them all down. Uncle Benny is a gorgeous-looking son of Declaration of War. Big, strong horse, and you take a look at him and you think, this horse might want a little bit of distance, so it really isn't surprising that Jason Service is also considering pre-entering Uncle Benny in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Route Race, the more conventional Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Race. He's got the win and you're in. He's likely to enter the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint off this 80-buyer performance, but I wouldn't be surprised if they actually decide to stretch him out because he is just a good, big-bodied individual. A nice effort for Uncle Benny, a horse that's still learning. And just consider, the turf course at Belmont really hasn't favored that style, or at least recently this meet it hasn't. Horses coming from way back, widest and fastest. Maybe the pace worked out to Uncle Benny's advantage, but boy, I think this is a pretty nice 2-year-old, an under-the-radar 2-year-old that can factor in these Breeders' Cup races, whichever one he goes to. As to back to his roots, he was 56-1, and maybe he shouldn't have been, because his 2 prior works leading up to this race were in company with John Terranova's older turf sprinter, Broadway Run, who's a pretty fast and talented horse. And the fact that Terranova put him in with Broadway Run made me think that he liked back to his roots, especially switching to the turf. Back to his roots ran fine. He was no match for Uncle Benny late, but I think he's probably found a home sprinting on the turf. And if he was to run in the juvenile turf sprint, I'm not sure he's a likely winner, but he's a horse that might be able to hit the board with a little bit of improvement. As for Dragic, the 6 furlongs here might have worked against her. And maybe if she turns back in distance for the Breeders' Cup, it'll work out. I also think she was really just kind of grinding it out with the blinkers off. This wet turf course might not have really worked out for Dragic, but it was worth noting. It seemed like she had that race in the bag until she switched back to her left lead, a sign of fatigue. Fayette Warrior finished 4th, and we saw Fayette Warrior under the whip at the 5/16 pole, looking like a horse that wasn't responding. Now, maybe she was just green, maybe she wasn't handling the course. The fact that she was able to finish 4th in this race makes me worried about the horses that finished behind Fayette Warrior. Horses like Busy Channel, who I guess ran okay with a good trip saving ground. Horses like Veterans Beach and Neverland Rock. Swamp Rat, who was at 5-1, didn't pick his feet up at all and just didn't seem to care for the good ground, but even if he got firm ground at Churchill Downs, it would be hard to take him off of a lousy race like this. I think this was a race that really went to closers. I think that if you wanted to take a horse based off race shape, it might be Dragic, simply because she moved into the teeth of the pace and could get a cut back if she ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint. But I think that Uncle Benny is a horse with some potential, and I think he's learning, and Jason Service has had a breakout last couple of years. Keep an eye out for him if he shows up in either the juvenile turf sprint or the juvenile turf. 80 Beyer speed figure for Uncle Benny, son of Declaration of War out of a Stormcat mare.